Good morning. Thank you for joining our info session today. To introduce myself, my name is Christina and I'm one of the student wellness counselors here at Alpha College. I'm also joined by Prakash, who is another student wellness counselor here. Today we'll be taking a look at what sexual violence is, how to prevent it, and how to report an incident both within Alpha and then also externally in Toronto. So, as a quick agenda for today's session, we're first going to discuss consent. So, what is it and how do we ensure that our interactions with others are consensual? We'll then discuss sexual violence specifically, going over definitions, myths and misconceptions, and its impacts on survivors. We'll then discuss how we can respond to instances of sexual violence as a bystander and as a community. Finally, we'll discuss reporting and what that might look like both within Alpha and outside of Alpha. I'd like to note that this presentation is not just about raising awareness, obviously, though it is. It is also a call to action to stand in solidarity with survivors and to challenge harmful attitudes and behaviors, and then also finally to provide resources and support. So before we continue, however, I'd like to provide a content warning that throughout this presentation, we will be discussing issues including, but not limited to, abuse, rape, sexual violence, harassment, suicide, and violence. If you ever need to step away for a minute or leave the info session altogether, please feel free to do so. Be kind to yourself and take care of yourself. If you want to discuss anything in this presentation or about your own experiences in more depth, I'll have my contact info at the end of this presentation, which I encourage you to keep hold of in case you want to reach out to me. I'll also have a QR code that'll lead you to a survey so I can gain invaluable feedback for future info sessions. And with that, let's just dive in. So what is consent? Consent is a general term for giving permission for something to happen. In the context of intimacy or sexual violence, however, it can be defined as the explicit, ongoing, informed, and voluntary agreement to engage in physical contact or sexual activity. With this in mind, we can see that consent cannot be given by someone who is incapacitated, such as by drugs or alcohol, for example, someone who is unconscious, or otherwise unable to understand and voluntarily give consent. Importantly, consent is informed, it's voluntary, and it's active. This means that consent cannot be given if a person doesn't know exactly what they're engaging in, if they're coerced or convinced into doing something, or if it's not ongoing throughout the interaction. So as a further breakdown of what does and does not constitute consent, consent cannot be given if the person is silent, if they're asleep, unconscious, coerced, or drugged. Additionally, even if you or the other person have a history of intimacy or sexual contact, that does not presume consent. Consent can also cannot occur in a relationship with a power imbalance. And finally, consent cannot be given on behalf of another person. It's important to know that consent can be withdrawn at any time. So with all of this in mind, we can apply this to sexual violence. So sexual violence is any type of unwanted sexual act done by one person to another that violates the sexual integrity of the victim and involves a range of behaviors from any unwanted touching to penetration. It may be carried out in circumstances in which the person has not freely agreed, consented to, or is incapable of consenting to, as we discussed in the context of consent. I'd also like to note that survivors of sexual violence are not confined to just women. Men and non-binary people also experience sexual violence. I've noted down some of the impacts of sexual violence on survivors here. I won't go through the entire list, but it kind of shows that the effects of sexual violence are innumerable, and they cause long-lasting traumas that really permeate all aspects of the lives of survivors. So with all this knowledge in mind, I'm sure you have some ideas already about what sexual violence is. Some of those thoughts might be correct, but some might be misconceptions. As it says on this slide, it's important to separate myths from facts, as myths perpetuate victim blaming and minimize the severity of a survivor's lived experience. The myths that I'm going to talk about today all come from the Government of Ontario's website, as you can see at the source at the bottom here, but there are many more myths that float around. The first common myth that we're going to discuss today is that sexual assault is most often committed by strangers. In reality, in 82% of cases of sexual violence, perpetrators are someone known to the survivor. Another common myth is that sexual violence is most likely to occur outside of the home. The reality of this is the majority of incidents happen in private spaces, such as the home. The next myth listed here is that if a survivor doesn't report to the police, it wasn't sexual violence. In actuality, fewer than 1 in 10 survivors report the incident to police. That doesn't diminish their experience, as there are many reasons why someone wouldn't go to the police. One such reason could be that sexual violence holds such a stigma that could make a survivor feel uncomfortable or even unsafe to report. The next myth is that one cannot be sexually assaulted by their spouse, so their husband or their wife. However, as we discussed in previous slides, we understand that everyone has their own bodily autonomy, and that doesn't stop once you're in a relationship. You're always allowed to say no and have personal boundaries, and you deserve a relationship where you feel safe to express those boundaries. The next myth here is that if a survivor didn't fight back, it wasn't sexual assault. However, there's many reasons why someone wouldn't fight back. First, for example, everyone reacts differently when put in a traumatizing or terrifying situation. This could mean the person freezing. Maybe the survivor is scared to fight back in case the perpetrator becomes more violent. Maybe the survivor was drugged or asleep and so is incapacitated. These are just some examples of why someone wouldn't fight back. Finally, the final myth here is that survivors lie about their experience. In reality, the number of false reports of sexual violence is low, and it's consistent with the number of false reports for other crimes in Canada. So how can I prevent sexual violence? With this background knowledge that we have, let's discuss how you can prevent it. 2 methods that we'll discuss today are being an active bystander and then normalizing conversations about healthy relationships. When witnessing an incident of sexual violence, being an active bystander means intervening before, during, and after witnessing an incident of sexual violence. It has 5 key components. First, disrupting the situation. So you see a situation, and this could mean distracting the perpetrator or involving yourself in the interaction between them and the survivor. It may not be safe to approach the situation or the perpetrator directly in all cases. So disrupting the situation could look more indirect, like engaging with the survivor to create distance between them and the perpetrator. Second, don't act alone. You can ask others around you for help, which not only supports you as an active bystander, but also sets an example of the values that you and your community holds and how sexual violence doesn't have a place in your community. This could also mean contacting the police if there's no one around you. Third, confronting the perpetrator. This could be done during an incident or after the incident. If you feel like the situation is safe to do so, you can tell the perpetrator that what they said or did was not acceptable. This would be the next step. The 4th step would be more so after the incident happening, but talking more widely about inappropriate behavior. As we discussed during step 2, having these discussions normalizes others in the community stepping in when witnessing an incident. Finally, after the incident, connect with and support the survivor. Ensure that they know that they're not at fault for the situation and that you're there for them to talk to if you are, or if you're not, you can refer them to an external resource. Another key aspect of being an active bystander and a community-minded person is to normalize conversations about healthy relationships and intimacy. So having those healthy conversations with peers, with family, friends, loved ones, having a responsibility to normalize these conversations and know what to expect in a relationship. So let's discuss reporting sexual violence. If you'd like to make a formal report of the crime that you've experienced or witnessed, you can do so either internally within Alpha, which would mean connecting with me, Prakash, or campus security, or externally to Alpha, which could be to the police or to a community organization. I'll directly address some common questions about reporting. So first, am I obligated to make a report? You are not obligated to make a report. It's important to note that there's a difference between disclosing your experience and making an official report. So a formal report is a disclosure made by a survivor that includes the explicit request to advance and initiate a formal investigation. So, for example, you may come to me for emotional support, but you don't want to submit an official report, and I will respect and support you in that decision. Equally, you might come to me and say, Christina, I really want to make an official report. Great. I will support you in that situation, in making the report, and then also supporting you emotionally during and after that process. It's important to note, though, that you do not need to make an official report in order to receive support, whether that's from me, from Prakash, from other faculty, from community organizations. A report is not necessary. Next question. Will there be any repercussions if I report? There are no negative repercussions on our end in reporting an incident of sexual violence that you either witnessed or experienced. If drugs or other substances were involved in the incident, you will not be disciplined for using those substances. If you're a bystander who witnessed an incident of sexual violence or what you think is sexual violence, you will not face any repercussions if you make the report in good faith. Additionally, we'll ensure that seeking support will not have a negative impact on your studies or your education. And then finally, how do I report? If you've experienced an instance of sexual violence, you may consider reporting it officially. So within Alpha, that would be to a student wellness counselor, such as me or Prakash, or to campus security. And then from there, we can help you in filing an official report. Externally from Alpha, you can also make a report to the police or via a community resource. If an individual who's experienced sexual violence would like to do so, security staff can assist with contacting the appropriate law enforcement or policing agency, and student wellness counselors or community resources can support you through the reporting process. At the end of this presentation, I'll list a few community resources that are available for support as a jumping off point. So here are some faculty resources, the contact information of the relevant faculty who can support you, both emotionally and with filing a report. This includes me and Prakash, both of the student wellness counselors, and then Thomas, the manager of student services. And then here we go is the anonymous incident report form with the link just below there. And then here are some community resources. This isn't an exhaustive list. There are many more organizations in Toronto and the GTA more broadly that exist to support survivors of sexual violence and abuse. In particular, the OCRCC and the Ontario Network of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Centres are two really good resources that are networked, so they can put you in contact with another resource that maybe isn't listed on this slide. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you all again for attending this info session. Here is the QR code that I was talking about at the beginning of this presentation. Please take a minute to scan it or visit the link you see in that box to the left if you can't scan it to fill out a quick survey to let me know what you'd like to see more of. Here's also my contact information that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. You're welcome to reach out to me directly regarding anything in this presentation. You're also welcome to set up a meeting with me via the link listed on the left here, the alphacollege.ca/meeting. If you'd like to be connected with any other community resources, if you'd like to discuss anything discussed in this presentation, or if you'd like to chat about your experiences or mental health, I'd love to hear it. I'm totally here to support you. I'm here to listen and support you. And I believe you. Thank you again for joining this presentation, or if you're watching the recording, thank you for tuning in. That's it. Thank you.